President Gerald Ford, in addition to being America's only unelected president, was he also always the deep state's man? All that and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Jeremy Ryan Slate Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Ryan Slate, the CEO and co-founder of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to combat cancel culture by placing them on the right podcasts and new media. You can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. All right, if you're brand new to this channel, like this video, leave us a comment, and smash the subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. So, where to start on this one? So at the moment, I am traveling in California, so I'm not in New Jersey in my home studio, so you might notice that this green-screened version of my studio is with me. Because on travel, obviously I don't have the same space I usually have. I have a travel microphone, which is not as good as my studio mic. I did bring the same webcam with me that I usually bring, so that was wonderful. But we took a screenshot of the studio wall and we green-screened it to bring it into this video for you. So if you're brand new to this channel, things usually look a little higher end than what we're doing right now. And actually, when we get back in the studio in just a couple weeks, we have a brand new DSLR camera we're going to be working with. We going to start shooting with the Canon, I think it's the Rebel SL3 or something like that. So we're also going to be upping our video quality just a little bit. But anyway, while I'm traveling for the next couple weeks and not working anywhere near the same schedules, we're handling some family stuff out here in California for the next month or so, and working a few hours in a weird schedule. So I'm trying to do some more like content-driven pieces for you guys. These episodes won't be as long as the ones we usually do, but they, believe it or not, take me a lot more time to put together because they're very research-based, like the episode we're going to have today. And I'm excited to do this for you guys and excited to dive into it. And in putting together the episode we did with Tony Arburn just a few weeks ago, as I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer here. As weird as that sounds, I found some really good ones I like. But in putting that episode together, there was something that really hit me. And I think I brought it up to Tony in the episode. And that's Gerald Ford, who's the 38th president of the United States. So I put together a lot of notes on this one. And in this episode, I really don't know what our running time is going to be on this one. I don't think it'll be anywhere near the full 40 minutes we usually do. But I wanted to take a look at President Gerald Ford because he's a really, really strange individual the more you look into him. And there's a lot of things that connect with Gerald Ford that kind of confuse you. One being he's the only American president to have never been elected, as wild as that is. Obviously, he was elected to Congress as he was the minority leader, I believe, was his actual position. But just to kind of go through some of this stuff, and would love to hear from you guys as well. If there's other topics you want me researching and talking about over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'd love to hear from you. And when we get back in the studio, we have some really cool stuff we're going to be putting together. We have Jay Dyer going to be coming on the show. A few other really great shows are putting together for you. But anyway, this episode, we're going to take a look at former President Gerald Ford and some of the weird things about him. So the first thing that I found really, really strange about Gerald Ford, he's born on July 14th, 1913. It's that pivotal year, guys. It's 1913. It's the year when those three things that killed the Republic happened. The first is that the Income Tax Amendment passes. The second is the 17th Amendment passes. And the final one, which passes over the Christmas break, is the Federal Reserve Act, and it goes into effect in 1914. Weird enough, that's the year that President Gerald Ford, our 38th president, was born. Now, here's where it gets weirder. He's born Leslie Lynch King Jr. That's weird, right? Like, that's not his birth name. His birth name is not Gerald R. Ford. It's actually Leslie Lynch King Jr., And he's actually later adopted by a man that his mother marries, I believe, when they moved to Michigan later in life. I guess not a super happy childhood, though Ford recalls a very happy childhood. So I found that to be the first out point. The name he's born with is not the name he takes. To me, that's just weird. And he's also born in 1913, which is that pivotal year when we lose our republic. All right, so the next thing here is he plays football at Michigan, and he's kind of this all-American character. But also the weird part about that is he spends 3 years not as a starter at Michigan. He starts his senior year, and in the 3 years leading up to it, Michigan wins the national championship. They're one of the best teams in the country. His senior year is the first year that Michigan has integration. So it's an interesting thing happening that year. But also, his year at Michigan, they go 1-9. So just not a very good team the first year he plays. Serves in the Second World War, later becomes a politician. He marries Betty Ford, who's the Betty Ford of the Betty Ford clinics, for the alcohol abuse clinics. But then there's a lot of strange things about him, kind of just skipping through his early career. But the thing that really stood out to me is really about his participation in the Warren Commission. He's one of the individuals picked by Lyndon Johnson for the Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, to look into the assassination of Kennedy. And there's a few really weird things about this. First of all, there was always thoughts that Gerald Ford could be the FBI's inside man. He was reportedly the eyes and ears of the FBI to the commission. And if the Warren Commission was a reality show, Ford would have been the contestant, at least secretly texting the producers. He kept the FBI informed about the dynamics of what was actually happening at the Warren Commission once again. And I believe his main position on that commission is that he was the biographer of the assassin, right? So he's the guy actually responsible for writing the backstory of Lee Harvey Oswald. So that's really, really interesting, and taking a look at that. And he makes some really interesting editorial adjustments, if you want to go that way. The first being, he's one of the first people to suggest the magic bullet factor, saying that this bullet zigzagged through and somehow hits Kennedy, and also hits the Texas governor as well. So it's kind of something that doesn't really make a ton of sense, but that's something he comes up with. So he's on the Warren Commission, and that just seems to be just a really strange thing of it. So born in 1913, I know that really doesn't mean much to those of you out there, but to me, that's kind of weird, right? That's a weird year for something to happen. And for those of us that believe the Republic began and ended in a certain year, 1913 being very pivotal as that, it's the year Gerald Ford was born. Not his birth name, serves in the Warren Commission. And then another really interesting thing about him is how he gets into office. So this whole thing kind of blows my mind as well. And once again, if you guys have other topics you want me to do in the next couple weeks, as we're kind of traveling and I'm having a little bit more time for research and I'm not really doing as much interviews, would love to hear the topics you want. But anyway, in terms of how he gets to become president. So if you want to take a look at Richard Nixon, right? And I want to I'm pulling up some stats on this too as I'm talking, so, bear with me here. He's elected in the election of, let's see here. He's in 2 different elections. Just bear with me here. I have a whole sheet of notes here as I'm kind of going through this, because this research takes me a little bit. He wins the 1968 election, and his running mate is Spiro Agnew. I believe he was the governor of Maryland, was it? You'll have to double check me on that later, but I believe he was like the governor of, he was the governor of Maryland. Before that, he was a county executive of Baltimore. He becomes the governor of Maryland. And then he is the vice president of Nixon. So they take office in 1969. 68 and 69, by the way, if you get a chance to look at it, are two of the wildest years in American history. They put 2020 to shame. So they take office in 1969. And, once again, look at our earlier episode on Nixon if you kind of want more of the background of that whole thing, right? But then there's the 1972 election. So Nixon and Spiro Agnew run for re-election. And it's a very interesting outcome in this election. Nixon runs against George McGovern. I believe McGovern there was an attempted assassination on him at some point when integration just started, if I'm remembering correctly. Those of you out there may have to correct me on that if you know that. I don't really know the answer to that. But anyway, in this election, they have 56.2% turnout. Nixon wins 60.7% of the popular vote. And of the Electoral College, he wins at 520 to only 17 for McGovern. So this is an absolute red wave. He just blows out McGovern.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
You can support the Wellness Company by heading over to twc.health/JRS. That is twc.health/JRS. Get up to 15% off select products. Support the Wellness Company and help support this show. Thanks again.
And as we talked about in the previous episode, Nixon does have a really weird background and a really weird experience, right? Like he likely was involved in a lot of regime overthrows in South America. He was probably buddy-buddy with the CIA from what it sounds like. But also, he has this enemies list, which you ever get a chance to read up on that, it's kind of wild how he weaponized the FBI and the CIA, well, not the FBI, I'm sorry, the IRS, that was the word I was looking for, against a lot of different people and organizations. Very, very interesting, tough to look into. But anyway, so Nixon's kind of this paranoid guy. He's kind of this guy that he was controlling the beast and he thought he could control the beast, and the beast eventually eats him. I think that's an interesting thing because remember, when we look at the Warren Commission, Gerald Ford really is, he feels like the inside man for the FBI, right? He feels like the guy that is running what the FBI wants. So then this election happens in 1972. Obviously, as you know, office changes take place in 73. They're going to kind of change over. You're going to have your office changeover. And then a situation comes up with Spiro Agnew, the vice president, which is very, very interesting. So in 73, a tax issue comes up. Felony tax evasion, which is very interesting. It happens in the federal court of Baltimore. Once again, the thing I find out strange about this is, remember, Nixon has this enemies list that he's using the IRS to go after. And it's almost like the beast starts to turn on them a little bit. The wheels of state are turning on them a bit. And I think that's why it's interesting to think of Ford, but it's also interesting that it's a tax issue that takes out Agnew. So Agnew leaves office, and the 25th Amendment, which was very recently passed, the 25th Amendment, let's see here, what year was that passed? Bear with me here. I didn't have this on my note sheet, but it was shocking to me when I looked at it. Because it's not long after the Kennedy assassination that this happens, because they kind of realize that this is something that they need to have. So it's submitted in July 6th, 1965, and then it becomes an actual amendment on February 10th, 1967, when 38 states ratify it. So it's used it's passed in 67, it becomes amendment in 67. In 73, they're already using it. So that's very interesting in terms of how to replace a vice president. So what ends up happening is Agnew ends up resigning, and the person he ends up picking is someone he feels is safe. Gerald Ford's goal in life, for some reason, was always to be the Speaker of the House. He's never going to get that job. He'd been the House Minority Leader, and he's named Vice President by Nixon. So then it gets even more interesting, right? So we have a replacement Vice President. Then Nixon himself gets into this Watergate scandal. So the Watergate scandal it starts in the background in 72, but it doesn't really become a big thing until 74, and it picks up hot and heavy with Nixon resigning in 74. So then the 25th Amendment is used again, and now your unelected vice president that was not on the ticket when Nixon was reelected is now your unelected president. Very, very, very strange to have that happen. So it almost makes you wonder, is Ford the guy where the powers of state said, things are getting a little bit too out of control? Nixon knows where too many of the bodies are buried. It's time to get our guy back in command. That's why I look at it, and the weird connections for me are the Warren Commission, and then also how he becomes president is strange. But as well, it's also strange that Ford isn't his birth name. It's a totally different name. Leslie Lynch King Jr. is his birth name. So it gets even weirder when in 1975, the first time on September 5th, there's an attempted assassination. In Sacramento, a woman named Lynette Fromme, I believe it's Fromme, it's Fromme, a follower of Charles Manson, pulls out an M1911 pistol at Ford. She didn't chamber a round, but so she ends up not getting a shot off. Her gun didn't fire, but then Ford ends up being whisked away by the Secret Service at this point in time. And then just 17 days later, in San Francisco, right? Sacramento and San Francisco. Interestingly enough, I'm in California. Both of these are in California. But anyway, I'm in Los Angeles at the moment. But anyway, 17 days later, Sarah Jane Moore took a shot at Ford. She pulled out a .38 special revolver and missed him. And after this point in time, there's this weird trench coat thing that Ford ends up wearing to protect himself. But to me, it's very strange that he's on the Warren Commission. He comes up with the magic bullet theory. He does the background on Lee Harvey Oswald. He then becomes vice president through the 25th Amendment, president through the 25th Amendment. And his re-election campaign gets a little bit funky, and he ends up not getting reelected. But the thing he's often credited with, which is the whole thing that really makes you think uniparty, which is very, very interesting, is he comes up with this idea called the Club of Ex-Presidents. So basically, it's the idea of all of these presidents of different parties collaborating behind the scenes. And that feels very, very deep state in a lot of ways. It feels very strange. So to look at this, I would love to know more about public records. I would love to know more of what he's involved in. Frankly, I wanted to interview somebody for this, but I couldn't find somebody that was even an expert on Ford because it's such an obscure thing to look at. He's a one-term president that doesn't serve a full term, doesn't get reelected, but a lot of very, very strange connections to him. And I think he's somebody that deserves more looking into, because there's just a lot of strangeness around Gerald Ford. And I believe, let me check the date on this, Gerald. Bear with me. Because there's this clip that's been circulating recently, and people have been talking about it in relation to Kamala Harris. Here we go. It's a minute clip, so just bear with me. I can pull it up on screen.
What advice would you give a young lady wanting to become President of the United States?
Well, I hope we do have a young lady at some point become President of the United States. I can tell you how I think it will happen, because it won't happen in the normal course of events. Either the Republican or Democrat political party will nominate a man for president and a woman for vice president, and the woman and man will win. So you'll end up with a president, a male, and a vice president, a female. And in that term of office of the president will die, and the woman will become president under the law.
Such a strange statement to make. But as I said, there's a lot of very strange things about Gerald Ford. I think he deserves a lot more looking into. I think a few of the things we raised today are interesting and important to look at. I want to do some more of these research episodes as we're traveling, but I think the strange case of Gerald Ford is something we need to look a lot more into. He's on the Warren Commission, doesn't use his birth name. He is the only unelected president, survives 2 assassination attempts within 17 days. He's also the creator of what's called the founder of the Club of Ex-Presidents. And in 1988, he predicted what it looks like we may experience very soon. I'm not saying that Joe Biden's going to pass, but I think the October surprise is coming up very, very soon, is you're going to see President Kamala Harris running for re-election. Thanks for hanging out today, guys. Remember to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash the subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. As I said, we are traveling right now, so these videos are not up to our usual par, but the information is still going to be very, very good. Would love to hear from you about a topic you want to hear from on a future episode, so comment below this video and let me know. Or also hit us up on the community tab on our YouTube channel or over on our Rumble page, comment as well. Thanks for being there. Make sure you subscribe. Catch you later.